Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here tonight with the order I see them on my screen. Frank Luke. Say hello. Also with Overgrown Hobbit, who is half of the team behind the Arkhaven comic Veg Folk Fables. Which just posted its 200th episode. And finally, we are joined by Jagi Wright, also is it L Jagi? L Jagi Lamplighter, and author of the the Enlightenment of
Unexpected Enlightenment of Rachel. Well, the Books of Unexpected Enlightenment is the series.
Which is which take place at a magical academy. So
she's also a participant and editrix of the Fantastic Schools short story series, which are brilliant, especially the ones for the middle school kids. So give them to your kids; they're awesome.
And
Frank and I were both written with stories, and our Hobbit here did the cover for Fantastic Middle School.
Oh. Yes, and I'm currently working on a story for the Fantastic Schools staff, and it's becoming a lot funnier than I expected. There's a character who's trying to steal every scene he's in, and the title of it is "Does a Training Quest Have Wheels?"
It's a great title.
Okay, so tonight we are getting together to talk about the novella, as we hashed out before we started the show. The novella by Jonathan Moeller, Hyperspace Demons. And I will warn you, if you are watching this, there are going to be spoilers all over the place, okay? So, before we really get into the discussion, Hobbit has agreed to give us a brief plot summary. And then after that, if you haven't read it yet and it sounds interesting, I would advise you to go get a copy. It's not expensive. It's, I think, less than $5. And go ahead and read the story and come back after that. So, Overgrown Hobbit, I turn it over to you for our plot summary.
Okay, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, the navigator of a starship, Malcolm Rawl, is in hyperspace, and he gets a bad feeling about this. So, he goes down to the galley, through the galley, to check on the crew and the whole bunch of soldiers that they're transporting to the next duty station for the war that they're all in the middle of. The Royal Castakaran Navy and Army are fighting alien monsters, horrible invading alien monsters with a determination to take over the whole universe and destroy everything in it. You'll learn more about them as the story goes on. He meets Moth, a private, Father Turnbull, thank you, the chaplain in the army, a captain, a really obnoxious lieutenant, and a sergeant, and they are dealing with some local, discipline issues when all hell breaks loose. And this is not your Star Wars hyperspace. This is a sort of Cordwainer Smith, John C. Wright hyperspace, where it is full of things man was not meant to know. It is full of mind-bending alternate reality stuff, and it is populated, well, you'll find out what it's populated by. And this is where you want to stop, because this entire little novella just goes lickety-split, and you think you know what's going on, you think you know who the characters are, and it turns out to be like Dead Again, that movie, with the little twist, or the Ivy Tree if you read Mary Stewart, and you go, oh, and then you go back and reread the whole thing, and you're like, yes, and he didn't cheat a bit.
Sixth Sense. It's a bit like Sixth Sense.
Yes, it doesn't cheat one little bit. So I'm going to count to 5. 1. Okay, you were warned. So anyways, all hell breaks loose because someone's bombed the ship. And the only thing protecting them from the mysterious, unearthly alien monstrosity that is hyperspace in this universe is this dark matter resonance generator. And if that fails, the things out there can come in and get you. And of course, they have to fix the ship. They have to find out who caused the bombs and fight their way to safety. And in the process, you learn more about the characters and the world and the sort of the secret that the main character is hiding. There you go.
Okay. So again, if you are still here and have not read it yet, I would advise you go get a copy and come back after you have read it, because the rest of this is not going to be a review in the sense of should you watch this, should you read this. It's going to be a discussion of the whole thing. Let's see. I guess I'll start off with the person I talked to least recently, and that would be Jagi. She has joined us once before to discuss a Rudyard Kipling poem. What are your first big thoughts about this story? What did you like? What did you dislike?
Okay, so I just got to read it this afternoon. So this is like a fresh response. I don't have yet a reflected over time response. I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it. It's like classic science fiction with a bit of a twist. I should say I've read quite a few other books by the same author. He was kind of my guru when I went into indie publishing. I really admire him. He also wrote my favorite review of my Pressburg books. I'm a fan of his in general, but this is the first science fiction of his that I've read.
Oh, I think she's lagging. But it sounded like she was going to say it's the first science fiction of his that she'd read. And that's true. When I went looking for more books by the author, because I was like, I have to read more in this universe. This is such a great story idea. I discovered that was it. Yeah,
There's nothing
done
else.
more science fiction space author.
I was under the impression this was part of a larger world. Jagi, if you hear us, we're not trying to be rude, but nothing is coming through from your end, so we'll be happy to have you back when you get back. But anyway, I was under the impression this was part of a larger story, but perhaps not, and I will have to investigate that. Anyway,
but it would amuse me that there was a moth there. I think the thing that I thought was the most interesting was having a character on stage and slowly beginning to realize that the reader could see the character, but most of the other characters couldn't see the character. Remind me a bit of Guy's Voltaire and his invisible girl, but if she wasn't evil, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so as I warned before, spoilers, and this is where we're getting to serious spoilers. One of the characters who is in there from the very first scene, in a sense, exists primarily inside the head of one of the other characters, and no one else can see her. Elizabeth is... It wouldn't be strictly accurate to call her a hallucination of Navigator Malcolm's.
No.
But it wouldn't
because
be...
other people can see her, but only under dire circumstances.
Yes, it wouldn't be entirely accurate, but
it's mind.
She's real... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm saying she's physically in his brain. She's in his mind, intertwined in his psyche. She's an actual being that exists.
And now that I think about it, this actually also reminds me of I had brought up before we were started recording one of Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, and I just realized this also reminds me a little bit of the character who came to be known as Lash in those books, because when she first shows up,
right, yes,
Dresden can see her, but no one else can't. However, in that one, Dresden is not aware of this at first, whereas in this story, Malcolm is fully aware that no one else knows about Elizabeth, and if someone else does, there's likely to be a problem. And yeah, I thought that was very well managed because she doesn't say a lot, and when she does, it is related to whatever else is going on. No one else really responds to her, but you don't, on the first time through, you don't really notice that for a while.
Well, you notice right away that she's predicting the future.
Yes.
Well, I just thought, oh, this is like Dune. She's got powers,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at first I didn't notice the others didn't react to her. But I did think it was a little odd that no one had said anything to her, kind of just about at the point that it began to become clear. But it's not really clear until one of the other characters comments on what the first guy who's suddenly able to see her says. And I'm like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah, she literally has the first line of dialogue in the book, and you cannot grasp everything in this book with one read, but it's short, so 2 reads is easy to do. And the second time through, I just kept noticing what you said, how nobody else responded to her. It didn't really stick out the first time until about halfway through. Someone says, there are no women on naval vessels. And I'm like, what?
What about this one? Yeah. I think what I really caught on was when one of the other characters said, you seem to think you had a girl on board. I'm like, well, she's standing right there.
Yeah.
So
I job of having her in the story be described as being hanging back in the doorway or keeping quiet. Yeah. There's this confrontation going on, and you get the impression that this is not necessarily.
Okay, are you guys here?
We're hearing
line officer.
Hobbit.
Yep.
Okay, I dropped out for a moment then.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, yeah. And so if you read it through the second or the third time, you start to notice that the author has cleverly had the character do things that you would expect someone who people didn't notice would do. And again, that just keeps you in not realizing what's really happening until people start to comment on the fact that there's no women on the ship. Oh, there's a girlfriend. Well, you must be crazy. There's no girlfriend there. And like,
Yeah, I mean, at first you just think she's like an attaché or some sort of support. And exactly, I mean, if the captain comes in with his support person, you wouldn't really expect anybody to. But there was some comment before it really came on stage where it might have been when he went upstairs with right before you figure it out. He went up the ladder with the sergeant.
Yeah. And
she went up too. And the guy had commented like, oh, he should go with you so you won't be alone. And I was like, that's kind of weird. You know? I said, didn't the girl go up too? Didn't you know? And I kind of just begun to wonder about her a little bit at about that point. So he really, does it well. But I know, as a writer, we used to talk about, if you wanted to write about a group of people who didn't have noses, some sort of alien beings, and they didn't know about noses. It was really hard to tell somebody these guys don't have noses if the person didn't know about noses. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. As an author, it's really hard to put on stage things, that are no one has a reason to comment on. Now, the main character could have commented on it, but he doesn't. Says it's normal to him, that this girl. There's also a scene where like he can see her eyes through her mask, and it wasn't clear because it was polarized glass if that was possible or not. I'm like,
yeah, that the line about he didn't want to go alone, have have anybody be, go by themselves, because you always have to have somebody watching to make sure that they don't turn on you. So it's kind of a zombie movie story too. And then, but at least Elizabeth will be able to keep an eye on things and give him a warning if he goes bad, and you're like, and yeah.
How come they don't realize she went up the stairs? It's really cleverly done. And then and so part of the background is that the navigator, there's this hyperspace,
mm-hmm.
and a navigator can get you through hyperspace better than anybody else, almost like a Dune navigator. They have a sense of it. And there's only like less than 150 of them in the whole
mm-hmm.
Army, whole military.
Yeah.
And so they have a kind of mystique. And right from the beginning, when they say, well, why would anybody try to blow up something's going on here, why would anybody try to blow up a troop ship?
Mm-hmm.
My first thought was they're trying to take out the navigator.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's when the navigator himself says something like, well, maybe they have another target. And I thought, we just heard these guys are rare. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things I couldn't tell was whether they were fighting aliens or not. I couldn't tell if they were fighting the Borg or if it was a human mass murder.
I'm pretty. But I could have been wrong.
Okay. So the name of the other faction is the Machinists, mm-hmm. and I can't point to anything in the story right now, but like my general sense, is that it's a race of human cyborgs.
That was my understanding too.
Okay.
And it might be humans and aliens. It wasn't clear, but it seemed to me like there was some talk of the fact that people lost their souls when they went in there, or they might, nobody knew, mm-hmm. as if it was humans being, I thought humans were being lured into joining, but whether it was just humans or humans and aliens, I wasn't clear. But the fact that it seemed to be at least in part humans and what they did to humans to use them
mm-hmm.
made it a lot eerier, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The spy said we're the next step in human evolution.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I read that though as it was one of those combine things, like like David Brin and the Uplift and all that. But I think your reading is more accurate, because they do talk about it runs more like human beings and what they call the singularity, where we get this sort of post-human human. It kind of reads more like that than an alien that's come in with like little happy lies. Yeah.
It's also kind of funny because and I don't have let's see, I might be able to find it. It says the Machinists don't believe in race and religion, and I'm like, oh, so they're like they're globalists. We're fighting the globalists. Okay, this is familiar.
Race and religion, because they were all replaced with a machine, so it didn't matter how it used to be.
I do have it. Those of us who are enlightened, those of us who understand that the great mind is the final stage of human evolution, realize that the Navy likes to move. Wait, no, where is it? It's. The unity of the great mind is humanity perfected. No more race, no more class, no more rich, no more poor, no more religion. Nothing but unity and singular purpose. Imagine no religion.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, but see, I thought of course, the guy.
The story misleads you a little bit, because you mentioned the discipline issue is that the young private, the Moth, Private Moth, I don't know if it ever says his first name, he's afraid that there are demons out there, and everyone's telling him they're not. So of course, when he starts thinking, well, there's this hyperspace, it has this hyper light, if you look in it, you get possessed and turn into a monster, it must be real demons. So now at this point you're expecting it to turn out to be demons in the out in hyperspace.
They're even named. Yeah, they're even named macrobes, which is the name of the demons from that hideous strength.
That hideous strength, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did think it was really funny. Like, here again, I actually noted the location of this one on my notes here. Where is it? They're, oh wait, yeah, they aren't demons. No, they're just, hostile incorporeal intelligences. I'm like, if that's not demons, that'll do until the real ones show up.
And the funny thing is that once you begin to realize that Elizabeth is not visible, then I'm thinking, okay, she must be his guardian angel, and there's demons out there. That was my next thought as you're going along through the story.
So cool is that this is a redemption story for fallen angels, and it's done through sacrifice. Oh man, did people give up his life for another? It's like, this is so cool.
Okay,
it is absolutely. The end really makes the story because it just lifts the whole thing. So I guess we haven't really explained what happens when if you don't keep out this you don't have this dark energy generator that breaks down. It breaks down because the ship's been sabotaged by the machinists. Is that these macrobes get in and they possess you, and you turn into a monster, and you want to do horrible things like eat human beings and cut them up and drop them to hear the noise of it, and then they have to kill you. So we know that there are these creatures outside. We know that they possess humans, that terrible things happen to humans. And then we see that there's this girl who's helping, who can kind of see the future a little bit, just generally, like something bad's going to happen type of thing. Nothing really specific. But we also see that there are kind of alternate realities or little bits of memories reflected in the hyperspace. So a sense of something bad's going to be happening could be just something coming out of the ramifications of hyperspace. And then we get to the big surprise at the end.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the only other warning I intend to give. Again, this is the big spoiler. Okay. Yes. If you go unprotected into hyperspace, you are likely to attract the attention of the macrobes, which are these hostile incorporeal intelligences. If you attract their attention, you become possessed, and they will turn you into a grotesque monster and almost certainly homicidal. Except if after you've been possessed, you engage in an act of self-sacrifice. If you do something that is going to kill you because you're trying to save other people, instead of becoming a demon-possessed monster, you become a navigator. And you develop the ability to understand hyperspace and survive hyperspace in a way no one else can.
And instead of joining with you to be a monster, the macrobe changes into this, what I first thought was an angel, this kind of a spirit being that you and only other people who possess can see, who is trying to help you, who is altered by the self-sacrifice. For some reason, they look like dead people the person knew, and I wasn't exactly sure why, but it was eerie that was the case.
Well, it's the on TV tropes, they would call that. I did the TV tropes for this story, by the way. So if you go to TV tropes and look this up, that was mine. But on TV tropes, they would refer that to that as like a form your mind can understand. You're dealing with something that you're not supposed to be dealing with, and so to make you able to comprehend and not go insane, it takes a shape that you're familiar with. And actually, there's
go ahead.
Oh, there's another set of stories, comic books, a comic book series from a company that unfortunately went under. It's Route 666, and I really like the stories. But yeah, one of the characters thinks she's talking to the ghost of her grandfather, and it later turns out it's not actually him at all, but it is, it's someone else trying to help her, but who is impersonating, basically taking that form to be someone she can relate to. Great comic book series. Not going to go into that right now because that's not the subject of tonight's discussion. But
one of the things I loved was how Malcolm, the navigator, the main character, would refer to various things like radiation's a terrible way to die, or other things like that. And then you find out later he died getting irradiated trying to save other people when he had the macrobe in his head. And that's how he became a navigator. Other little things like that, where each time he made these kind of knowing comments, he in fact knew, which I thought was cool, because we got the impression that he was a bit grizzled, that he'd been around a bit, but it's nice to have it. I don't mean, I just mean the experience, it's nice that, and that's proven true, that he backs up his implications with reality. So.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing,
I did kind of expect him to say, I have been and always shall be your friend, whenever he was talking about the dying from radiation poisoning.
Yeah, it was that kind of an event, wasn't it? Exactly, yeah.
And I do find it really interesting that the it's there's these these things that take you over, and the way it describes it is the first thing they do is start grabbing all the horrible impulses that are running around in your head and feeding them back to you at like 100 times volume. And it's like, I know what's inside my head, and sometimes it's not great. But again, if you resist that, and if as firmly as possible you make the other choice, and it's it is this like the whole conclusion of the story depends basically on this kind of moral choice.
Mm-hmm. It's a good story.
And I will say, it also feels a little weird to me. I'm a Christian. I am relatively recently a Catholic, and basically he's like, well, he talks. Private Moth is the person who becomes possessed, and basically succeeds and wins through. But he wins through by shooting himself in the head. And I'm like, there's this weird like. Oh,
they explain that away. They do. They explain that.
Well, they make a clarity. They clarify between suicide and sacrifice. He gets him to, as if he's shooting the creature himself, even though it's in him.
Yeah.
But it is a bit ambiguous. I kind of wish there'd been something a little more clear. The only thing that I did not like, I won't say dislike, but the only thing in the story that I wished was a little different was there's a priest character, a chaplain, doesn't do anything. I wanted him at least to try to stop the demon with a prayer and a cross or something.
Well, but he also says,
I was expecting him to do something.
Yeah.
But he also says these are not demons.
Yeah.
But it would have been clear that it wasn't demons if he'd held up a cross and it didn't do anything. You know what I mean? I didn't try, even if it was like one line of just, the father said a prayer, but the thing didn't change. You know what I mean?
I think
just kind of expected.
But if it had, if these are demons and he had held up a cross and prayed, then that would have, and it was expelled, then they have another way to fight the macrobes, and we don't have Moth's sacrifice.
Right, but he's
Also,
not entirely demons, and he held up the cross and prayed to make it slightly clear what exactly the nature of it is, or whatever. I mean, I don't know.
I guess what you would have to have for that, what you would have to have for that is a somewhat inexperienced chaplain, because this is something that they would cover. Especially for like military chaplains, they would cover that very thoroughly in the training. Like
then they could have just solved. They could have solved that by having Moth say, "Father, shouldn't you pray?" And the father said, "It's been tried many times and it has no effect," or something. You know what I mean?
that would, yeah.
I just felt like we should have done something
Reasonable. I do think it's not reasonable to assume that the chaplain, who everybody in the army who's gone on this, who's on the that you meet, this is like their first time in hyperspace. This is not something they've done a lot of. They're very experienced at the fighting and all that, but not the hyperspace stuff. So the chaplain believes, let me rephrase it, not their first time in hyperspace, but the first time dealing with the beings in hyperspace. Okay, not that they've never been on a ship before. And as a result, the chaplain has no reason not to believe the party line that this is not that this is spiritual warfare.
Okay.
So he's no reason for him to do it. The only thing that I would have liked to see, like you said, was not that he tried to expel the demons, used and exorcise them, because the party line, they're just like try to expel an animal. Why would you do that? Or a tiger? However, that he didn't actually pray as they were going through there, because there's no, I mean, he would have been praying for them along the way. That's the only part I
Should have been.
find plausible.
I mean, even if he just prayed for the soul after they shot it or something,
Yes.
it would have felt like he was a chaplain. Because when he first spoke, like, oh, this is the chaplain. That's really cool. And then he kind of didn't do anything after that.
Yes.
So it's a short story. So, as an author, I know it's a lot to ask. But as a reader, I would have liked just a little tiny, a line or two, something more from the chaplain. Yeah. That was the only thing that didn't seem to me to very elegantly work together.
So I will say, okay, overall, I very much like this story, which is why I've wanted to have this discussion. I will say my main criticism, and I'm kind of aware of why this is, but my main criticism is most of the characters I have a hard time telling apart. There's, and I actually made a list of, let me count, I think it's 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, there's a total of 9 characters in this story. And there's 2 of them are more or less just plot devices. Because 2 of them you almost entirely interact with as monsters. That's not really a character, it's a monster that can talk. And so, like, if you take out, if you ignore those 2, basically the people I have a real sense of and can easily distinguish is Malcolm the Navigator, and the chaplain, Father Turnbull, and Private Moth, and Elizabeth, but she's an odd case. And so, like, there's 3 officers.
I thought the officer who turns out to be the traitor.
Yeah, I could tell him apart easily.
He was moody and nasty. And then there was the captain. The one I was okay with all those. The one that threw me was the sergeant, who I realized was in there because they need to kill another person. But he kind of almost. Sorry.
For some reason, the sergeant was wearing a red shirt. Everyone else was in blue. I don't understand it.
I almost wish that instead of him having come with them, because he doesn't really get introduced properly, have a proper personality, that they found him along the way or something, found him holed up in one of the hallways they went through or something, just because then at least he'd had, otherwise you had the captain, the lieutenant, the sergeant, and the chaplain talking to one guy. It seems a little top heavy, One poor private who was having a hard time. But if it had been the captain, the lieutenant, the chaplain, and the kid,
Yeah.
and then they were going down the hall and they found in the rooms one guy had put a mask on and had one of the things we didn't mention was that they gassed after the disaster. They gassed the crew to let them sleep because they can't be possessed when they're asleep. But one of them could have been quick-witted and got his mask on or something, and then they could have had another character come along that way or to get possessed.
So well, let's see.
Not even quick-witted. The ship's been there's bombs that went off. The atmosphere is full of burning whatever kind of toxic stuff. You grab a gas mask, right? So he would have had a gas mask on already before and it would make sense for a sergeant to have that kind of muscle memory. Like I know where it is. I grab it. I do it right away. Even if I'm on a ship and I'm not a ship-based.
And we haven't even mentioned it when they get where the crew is. Some of the crew was eaten out by nanites and turned into horrible undead cyborgs.
Yes, I was about to mention those. So yes, we've already said there's the possessed people. In the course of this story, we meet 3 of them. Although one of them not long enough to really change that much. There are also infiltrators. Is that the term they use for them?
Yes, that's the term.
Yeah.
There's also infiltrators who were, they were injected with, nanobots, and unlike they were, by the traitor, by the person who initiated this whole plan. The nanobots transformed them into zombie robot spiders. And
they called the dead human zombie dead zombie.
Yes, and so it's these.
The sergeant had been shooting them, but they come around into a new corridor, and the sergeant just shooting them. And that would be a nice way to do it. I'm going to step up in just a second to help my autistic son for a moment.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
But they had. But yeah, and so those in terms of in terms of antagonists, not antagonists because antagonists is a character. In terms of monsters, in terms of horrible creatures, the heroes have to deal with. The infiltrators are actually a pretty cool kind of creature. These again robotic spiders, these metal spider legs. They have a toxic. They have a neurotoxic sting, and they're running about with human heads with all the blood drained out, in the center, and those human heads are screaming in horror. They don't have a voice, but their mouths are screaming in horror, and their brains are being basically exploited for any knowledge they might have that is useful to the enemy's mission.
I didn't get the impression that, unlike the macrobes, I didn't get the impression that the brains of the victims were being used for knowledge. In other words, the software wasn't being accessed; they were just being used as like a CPU or a hardware. I didn't get the impression that the nanite people, the singularity people, had access to the soul, to the consciousness, to the being of the individual. But the individual was along for the ride, and that's why they were like, because they've just been hijacked. They were like the people who have that disease where they've got the shut-in phenomena, where they're still conscious, they're aware, but they can't move or speak. So like that, which is also terrifying.
Yeah, they're pretty scary. Jagi, I muted you while you stepped away in case I didn't want you to. So if you want to undo that. I don't know where. There it is. You got it? Or no? Yes. No, you're still silent. I think you fixed it and then unfixed it. There you go. Okay.
I got it now. Yes, you're right. I did. I touched it twice.
Let me see. Where is it?
Which thing are we talking about?
We're still talking about the infiltrators. And I'm trying to figure out whether they
have access to the consciousness of their victims, or whether they're just riding them, like, you know.
Pretty sure they were dead. And no, you're right. I think they did say they had access to their memories. Because I remember that suggested they'd know where in the ship to go and things like that. I thought that was kind of scary.
Oh yeah.
Okay, here it is. Yeah, said Malcolm. They keep the brain, uses a CPU. That way they have access to the victim's memories, can do a lot of damage that way.
You're right.
And which actually I think, if I understand correctly, I've heard that there was an older version of the Matrix script where that was what they were using the humans for. They were running they were basically using their brains as processing power, not as batteries, because people make terrible batteries.
Yes.
Using people as batteries is doesn't actually make a lot of sense. But
processing
extra brain power. Yeah.
Yeah, it's called a neural network, and yeah, that was the first draft, and someone at the yeah, somebody said people won't understand this. Go with battery, they'll get it.
Which I guess if you're doing a science fiction if you're doing a science fiction story, no, go with using their brains as a processor. But if you're doing a movie, you're not aiming for the same intelligence level. So yeah.
But people know what computer chips are. They're using their brains as computer or computer chips. That would work. You don't have to go into detail.
I think it would have worked, and it wouldn't have. But Hollywood guys, they don't.
I don't know whether they made the right call. I kind of understand it. I'm not going to say absolute, but speaking of movies, I don't know if any of you have seen this. This story, Hyperspace Demons, also reminded me just a little bit of Event Horizon. Have any? Frank? No. Oh, I'm the only one. Okay.
Don't think so.
Stargate.
Yeah, no. Event Horizon is a science fiction horror movie. I don't know when this was. I think it was late 90s.
1997.
And basically, the very first hyperspace ship that humanity creates, on its first voyage, just goes missing. No one knows what happens. And then X years later, maybe 10 years later, it shows up like,
is everybody frozen?
In the orbit of Neptune or something like that. And they get a signal from it. And so, basically the, Space Force or whoever this is decides to send out a crew to, salvage it and try and find out what happened. And then, they get there, and basically the ship itself is haunted, possibly. It's never entirely clear, but it slowly, drives the crew insane, drives them to do horrible things, kill others, kill themselves, and
it should be in the same background of the story, so to speak.
Yeah, it does seem in a lot of ways similar, and so that was one of the first things I thought of when I read this story. I liked it, but I like horror movies, and I don't mind a little bit of it's a little gory at parts. So if that bothers you, like, don't go there. But I liked it, and it reminded me of this story. I've also heard some people say that it they think Event Horizon is a prequel to the Warhammer 40,000 universe.
All right.
So one thing I thought was really interesting about the background was that these machinists are either just humans or humans and aliens. It doesn't really matter, I think. who, have given up their humanity or their individuality and become this machine thing. So they don't have the quality that allows the macrobes to possess human beings, which at least Chaplin thinks is the soul. With the result, of course, that they have no navigators because they don't have any capacity to be possessed. They don't have the capacity to sacrifice themselves. So that's the one major advantage that the human beings have in their war, is that they have these navigators who can arrive more quickly at the locations where the battles are, because they have a better sense of the warp and the waff, or whatever it's called, the warp of hyperspace. And the other guys can't do that. So I just thought it was really interesting that they're getting this concrete advantage to their naval force because of these people, but they don't want to publicize it and try to make navigators because, of course, they don't know who's going to be willing to sacrifice themselves for others. And
well, it's
and if you did it artificially,
it's a moral choice.
Sacrifice yourself.
Well, and it's let's see. So yeah, it's like you deliberately, given the failure rate, like in this story, we see 1 in 4 succeeds. We don't know, and we don't know what the general failure rate is. I have to say, I'm not terribly confident in my success in this. If I were in that situation, like I said, I have some idea about the terrible things inside my own head, and I don't know. I don't know how well I would succeed in fighting it off. But
we
there's
don't
also
know.
the power of moral choice here, because keep in mind, this is a novel that allows for spiritual reality to impact the physical world, which I think is really interesting. You don't see that a lot in science fiction. Their moral choices have real weight. In this case, it's impossible to be a navigator unless you make the moral choice to give up your life for other people, even knowing that it's terrifying. You want to live, but you don't just kill yourself to end the pain, because I imagine that the macrobe is flooding your brain with all kinds of pleasure signals as well, because they seem to be pretty happy once they cross over into the La La Land and become monsters. So you don't want to kill yourself. You have to make the choice. I'm going to kill myself, and I'm not suicide. I'm going to save other people with my sacrifice. So unless you're making that moral choice, it doesn't work, because it's only the moral choice affects the macrobe.
It'd be really hard to tell someone ahead of time and have it succeed. There are some people who could do that, but if you knew I have to make a sacrifice, then it becomes harder to do.
Is that really?
Is it really? Yeah. I said it's almost impossible, in fact, to because you think, oh well, I might live. I'm not really going to die. I'm going to live with now I'll have extra powers and I'll be able to help other people. And it's like, is it?
Yeah,
really
and also if you
moral choice.
Also, if you do it basically presumably if you tried it for the goal of becoming a navigator, like you might succeed in killing yourself, but that wouldn't create that wouldn't initiate the shock to the system that the microbe needs to come around.
Switch. Yeah, and Malcolm says near the end that they can't tell people about this because in the heat of the moment, even those who plan to sacrifice themselves might change their mind, and it's too big of a risk.
The only thing I can imagine it could do, because I keep thinking, how many people does this happen to that survive? What if they run out of navigators? The only thing I could think of is if they said to a person something like, we need more navigators, and in order to do that, we need some people to go on a suicide mission where they're going to say, as if you went in thinking you were going to die because you were somehow going to be helping somebody by doing that.
Somebody else would be able to be a navigator.
Right. It might lead to something. It might be a way to set it up to have people take what in the corruption campaign, our role-playing game we used to run for years would be called a great race test. Where they all had mental components that you had to do or moral components where you either died or you did the correct thing. So this fits right in with that. But in order to take that test, you might be able to present it so that you had a situation where you had some candidates who thought they were giving up their life to save other people. And that might carry through. Maybe they'd be in the right state of mind. But other than that, I don't know how you do it, You don't want to just flood a group of people. Then there's, if there's nothing, if it's not an emergency, there's no need to sacrifice yourself. It's not going to make any sense, Yeah. You're not going to be able to get the right outcome.
Also, remember that one monster who said after he got turned, he talked about, now I'm going to go back to my planet and do terrible things to the people on my planet. It's not clear whether you are crazy dysfunctional or simply evil. If you're simply evil and you're like this monstrosity, you can still use the ship and go back into the world and start and just be a one monster swath of destruction. So it's a real risk. How would you make sure that
I mean, looking at it from the end of the story, to paraphrase Jane Austen, I'm not surprised that they only have 134 or whatever it is, 70 something navigators, but that they even have 100 navigators.
Well, so I wanted to go back to something someone touched on earlier. Like, okay, the machinists, the cyborg race that they're fighting, they can't have navigators. On the other hand, if I understand this correctly, they also aren't going to get possessed.
No.
So they have a negative. They're not going to get these rare and extremely powerful allies, but they probably don't have to build in the dark energy resonators, and they don't have to worry if one of them breaks down about everyone on board being ripped apart by a psychopathic monster. And so
they can't move as quickly, but their ships might be cheaper. Because they don't need the extra shielding. They don't need to be as worried about what's going to happen. So they could build their ships more cheaply and move around more ships, but they couldn't arrive as quickly. Yeah, so that's an interesting, it sounds like those old space war games that were popular on the Atari, One guy can move quicker, the other guy has more ships.
Well, it fits into like, a kind of, gamification of the world. They have this plus, this racial plus, this racial minus, and you're building your character. Oh, you want a machinist? Okay.
Exactly.
Take the machinist package. Here's the prestige class.
Yeah. Can I play Mike? No.
So this is for the two writers here, because I'm not technically a writer. I'm just an illustrator. Science fiction, in theory, if you believe the Asimov crew from the Golden Age, Silver Age, can't have a supernatural moral dimension, where the moral dimension is not just some kind of utilitarianism. It's actual. The supernatural world is real. It makes sense. It exists. You can't have that apparently in science fiction. I submit that that's not true, and Courtney Smith and other people are telling these stories are true. The pulp novels tended not to have a supernatural or religious element, except in passing, because that's not the point of pulp. But there's no reason science fiction can't, even if it's pulpish. What do you guys say?
Well, there's two things you said there, because there's the supernatural and there's the moral, which are not strictly or don't have to be the same thing.
I think one follows from the other, but okay.
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, you can tell all kinds of stories with no apparently supernatural element, but which hinge on moral choices.
I'm kind of the more divine moral rather than the human
Okay.
moral.
Utilitarian.
I think if you have something like an elf or a fairy, you have to have an explanation. But I don't see any reason why you can't have. I think I'll work at it backwards. The original scientists and all the scientific method come from the churchmen of the 10th through 14th century, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, they came up with the idea of science, but they believed in God.
Mhm.
I think you could definitely have science fiction. I mean, Babylon 5 almost did with
Mhm.
Kosh and stuff. I think you can have science fiction that has a divine element in it, as long as the divine element is in keeping with our experience, and in other words, and not more like magic.
Yes.
Miracles, I think you can have a miracle, but
Mhm.
it should be a miracle that's kind of in keeping with the scientific experience. There
Yeah.
are a lot of scientists and military people who will tell you stories about the time something miraculous happened to them,
Mhm.
you know.
Right.
But
like in this novel, where everything can be read straight up as a Christian story with demons and redemption and angels and the whole 9 yards, or it could be read as maybe not. And the characters do exactly what we would do in this world and say, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You know.
Yeah. The
But
problem.
my theory is that at some point in the history of science fiction, it became simply understood that in the future there would be no Jews or Christians or Muslims, except in a very sort of vague, they're just background noise. And if you're lucky, you'll get them there. And if not, they might as well not exist. They just simply don't. They're just not part
and
of
that's,
the world.
For whatever reason, early science fiction was, kind of dominated by atheists. And so, yeah, I think that is another thing. But again, atheists, like supernaturalism and morality,
or
don't, in terms of storytelling, those don't have to be the same thing. And so the other thing, though, and this is, kind of another way of approaching the same thing, but I have seen, two, in terms of like adventure stories, in terms of like, the hero conquering, whatever obstacle. It seems to me there's broadly two types. One is where the hero conquers by being clever and by being, and by, thinking smarter than the enemy. The other is where the hero triumphs by basically through by making the right moral choice, by courage, by self-sacrifice, by doing what is right even when it's going to cost him. And again, a lot of early science fiction is dominated by, I think, I have up here a bunch of stories by Isaac Asimov. Absolutely 100% run on the hero is cleverer theory.
Yep.
And in some aspects you can make interesting stories. I think the other kind of stories, I think the other kind of stories in general make better, more lasting, make a more lasting impression.
I think so too. I think so too. In fact, it's interesting though. One of my favorite writers is James H. Smith. I have almost everything he's written, some of it hand-bound, and I reread them a lot. And I'll say it is a very amoral, not amoral, but a very a-religious sort of universe. It's a universe where no one believes in God. If God does show up, it's always a trick, right?
Yeah.
And it works because the stories are very shallow. They're super fun and really entertaining. but they just operate at this sort of Pulp Fiction level, right? They don't have to be any deeper because that's the stories they're telling. Yeah, I think that's a result of the expectations of the genre that I don't think were necessary for the genre, if that makes any sense.
You know, there is, I read Christian apologetics, and one of the arguments for the existence of God has to do with what we see in the universe, that we see purpose, we see beauty, we recognize people having mental prowess and a mind. And when you start thinking about that, how does that come about just through random chance?
Why?
Similarly, if an atheist writes a book like Asimov does, he can't put into it what he doesn't have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's going to have to be the hero is just cleverer.
Well, and it's and C.S. Lewis talks about this in Miracles. Although I don't know if he quite puts it this way, but like, why should the thoughts in my head have any relation to the functioning of the outside world? Like, if we are just a series of chemical reactions, and there's nothing other than that going on, like the idea that I understand the world in any meaningful sense is kind of weird,
right?
Because there's no like evolution doesn't really, there's no reason for evolution to give me any comprehension of the universe, any way of thinking beyond get this next thing, and so
there's a pamphlet that I read when I was young that's written by someone from my church. It's called God's Law of Adjustment, and the main concept from the pamphlet is that you can never be in a situation that God can't solve. And I remember as hearing someone talk about this when I was young, like on a tape, and it included a testimony not related to the original pamphlet of a man who was in a submarine that was like going down, and the door was locked. They couldn't open the door that goes around, and praying and somehow getting out of the situation. And it really struck me that even someone in this dire, completely impossible situation could rely on God. And I've occasionally thought, I'd love to see the Christian apologetic answer to the cold equation. Where the cold equation is a story where a girl, I think it's a girl, stows away on a ship, and they've calculated down to the last, micro ounce exactly how they're going to come back into the atmosphere, and they have to throw her overboard because there's no way for them all to live. And I think, well, God's law of adjustment could solve that. I'd love to see a story that was kind of hardcore the way the original is. It's one of the most hardcore science fiction stories, and to that degree, a good story, even though it's a sad ending.
So,
but you can't help thinking God could solve that.
So here's what I'm thinking, because I didn't mean that people like Asimov, who were atheists, didn't write science fiction that had a good depiction of the reality that the world we live in, extrapolated into the future, would have with respect to religion, any religion. I was thinking more of genre expectations that were created so that people who were Christian, who did, or even not even Christian, but just observed people in the world around them, simply edited that out of their stories, or didn't even put them in the stories, because the same like in romances, the genre expectation is a happily ever after. That's an expectation. You can thwart it, but you generally write that. And the expectation is in the future, there's no religion. And in the future, when you have the cold equations, nobody prays. And you could have the girl voluntarily say her prayer, pray, to Santa Lucia, or pray to the Blessed Virgin, and say yes, thy will be done, and accept your death. Or you could have the pilot pray and a miracle occur, or you could have them both. You could have all this dimension happen. There's no atheist in foxholes.
Yeah.
That whole human dimension just doesn't exist. You could
Yes.
tell the same story with the same result, and yet it wouldn't be the same result.
Like the experience of many people who pray.
Mhm.
Occasionally, when you pray, something truly miraculous happens.
Yeah.
But I would say ordinarily, what you get is an idea.
Mhm.
So if you wrote the story so they had to, throw her out, and then they prayed, and a good idea of somehow to solve the problem came,
Mhm.
that to me would reflect the way testimonies go when people
Yeah.
report how their life was changed through praying,
Yeah.
And I just think it'd be interesting. Now, I should say there's a whole genre nowadays of Christian science fiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of which is very Christian.
Mhm.
Christian science fiction, the genre, and some of which is just science fiction written by Christians that have more of a Christian to it. I haven't read much of it, so I can't really comment on how well it works, or
Yeah.
where the
Mhm. Like I said, I just think that you get stories like this one by Mr. Mueller or Moeller are
I don't know how to
exemplary.
pronounce it. O-E or E. I think
It's
Moeller. I think.
yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
So
It's
I don't
Moeller.
know. I mean, I like him very much, and I've talked to him quite a few times and read quite a few books of his, but that doesn't tell me how to pronounce his name. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's done it. He's simply told the story and included a reality that is real, that there would be.
Yeah.
And it is pulp science fiction. It's exactly my favorite type of science fiction. It reads like a James H. Smith story. If James H. Smith was allowed to have Christianity or religion or the supernatural in his story, even though it doesn't have to be supernatural at all. He's got a entire, pseudoscientific explanation for everything.
Yeah. In fact, in this case, you can't really tell if the microbes are just what the chaplain says, or if they're actually demonic and now they've been altered, which would be great. But the effect is similar to the second.
Yeah.
The difference between turning into, I think it says, we didn't mention, but they changed because they're old, DNA that's not normally used gets triggered, so they turn into monsters and they want to kill everybody.
Yeah.
And is it just a psychological effect? But if you then sacrifice yourself and you get this, and and an angel in training helper, the effect is as if it was supernatural.
Yeah.
Whether or not you want to give a human or supernatural explanation for it.
Sorry, now I'm just thinking of It's a Wonderful Life and the Clarence. Is it Clarence?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Shows up right when he's about to kill himself.
Well, one could imagine, now that you imagine if for the rest of his life he could see Clarence and no one else could, kind of like the same actor could see Harvey in the
Or
gosh.
what happens to the microbe after the host dies? Does it continue on?
I was wondering that myself.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe there's an entire invasion of the macrosphere going to happen with these macrobes as their host dies, and they're going to go back, return to the realm in which they came, but as like what's his face at the St. Patrick to the Irish.
It's an interesting question because so one of the eeriest things we only kind of glossed over is that Malcolm sees Elizabeth and no one else does. But the moment somebody becomes possessed, they can also see Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So the moment somebody says, "Who's that girl?" he knows that person's been possessed.
Yeah.
Yep.
But then Moth gets his own girl, Lisa, which is looks like his dead sister. And so if Moth can see Elizabeth and Malcolm can see Lisa, there certainly could have been cases when a navigator was present when a second navigator died. What did they see? Did they see their Lisa disappear? Was she set free? Did she turn into a ball of light? You know what I mean? It'd be an interesting thing if you could explore the universe more to hunt down some navigators who'd seen other navigators die and say, what happened? You know?
What happened?
Also, keep in mind, the navigators can see hyperspace. I thought this was a goof by the writer the first time I read it, because they were talking about everyone has to shut their eyes and hold on to each other's belts like miners. And he's describing what he sees and how it makes him reflective. And I'm thinking, aren't you supposed to be going crazy now? What?
And there's even a conversation because Elizabeth kind of says you got to keep going, don't get distracted, and he thinks he couldn't get possessed, but he became introspective. I'm thinking, I wonder why he can't get possessed. Is it a power? Is it something to do with navigator? Is it something about him personally? You know, and why is it he can't get? So that was really interesting because he's gone to such trouble to say don't look at it, and then he's looking at it. You're like, isn't he in danger? That was really interesting. And when he looked at it, he like memories came up and all sorts of. When he said he was introspective, it was like his life kind of was playing a bit about him and reflections and poems on the wall. I mean, it's like almost like a mental state.
Well, and it's it also, they don't go into much into the nature of hyperspace, but like depending what story you read, people talk about time as a fourth dimension, and if hyperspace is basically traveling through accessing a separate dimension, it could be basically you're kind of seeing time kind of from the side, able to see time the same way we normally see height and width and depth. And so like he's able to see he may literally be looking at things out of the past that they're passing by that moment, which anyway. Well, I think I covered most of the things I wanted to say about this story.
I'll
Jagi,
say one last thing on what you just said, which was at the point where they went through the hyperlight, I thought it was hellfire.
Oh.
I thought, they're traveling through hell to get somewhere. This is the fire of hell. It has a bad effect on human beings. So I don't know what it really was, but that was what I thought.
Space only works because you can take a shortcut through hell.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought was going on.
Cool.
I mentioned the movie Event Horizon earlier. If you're interested in horror movies and you don't mind, a little bit of blood and guts, it is a really well done movie. But I definitely understand why it wouldn't be in some people's tastes. And that is some people's theory about what happened in that movie, that when they sent the ship through hyperspace, it actually went to hell. It's also interesting, from my perspective, almost everything in that movie could also be explained by basically there's a side effect of hyperspace or the transition that induces violent hallucinations. And basically there's nothing actually happening. It just makes people kind of crazy, and they're likely to do actually exactly this. Like if they sent people into, presumably at some point they sent people through hyperspace and didn't know what to do, didn't know they need to protect them, and everyone went crazy and murdered everyone.
I kind of feel like this could all take place in the same background as Scanners Live in Vain.
Yes, that's exactly what I was
thinking. Because the people go kind of crazy when they send them into space until they put the oysters. I mean, instead of a dark matter thing, they could have oysters.
Is that Cordwainer or Smith?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think I've read that, but it's been a long time, so I don't remember anything right now.
The basic setup is that the scanners are human beings whose their bodies and their emotions are separated so they can go into space because space does terrible things to you. And then they come up with another method of going into space, which involves putting living things. I think they use oysters around the ship so that they're inside, you're protected. So the scanners no longer are needed, and they're these human beings who've sacrificed themselves to become these things, you know. But that
cannot
sense
clench right
that
now.
going out into space would have a bad effect like that, it seems to me like it could be another take on what a similar universe. So.
Okay, Frank, any last thoughts you wanted to put in?
Yeah, I got suddenly came to mind here during part of this. It kind of reminded me of Brian Nemier's Soul Cycle series.
Yes.
With especially Netherial.
Which is in fact Space Pirates Going to Hell.
Yes.
Yes. How do you move through space? We rip a hole in hell and go.
That series always reminds me of now I've forgotten the name of it. Roger Zelazny's Egyptian book, Creatures of Light and Darkness. I mean, if Roger Zelazny wrote Space Pirates Going to Hell, it would be a lot like his series. I think, you know?
Okay, and Overgrown Hobbit. Any last thoughts you want to put in on this this story?
Just Jagi, can you ask Mr. Moeller to write more in this universe?
I will. I don't know. I mean, I'll send him the link to this, and we can ask.
Well, I think that
if he has another idea back, you know, I'd love to know more about who else became one of these people and how they become and what happens.
If authors work anything like I think, that partly depends on how many of this he sells.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So, you know, try and get some sales going for this.
It's worth it. It's really good. I realize if you've gotten this far, you've heard the spoilers, but hopefully people will hear the beginning and at some point stop and go buy it and then come back and hear the rest of it. And
I gotta say, it rewards multiple reads. Like I said, it definitely, knowing the spoiler ahead of time, it's like I said, a really good story. Doesn't matter.
I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. To those of you watching, I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching, and we will talk to you again soon. And God be with you.
Amen.
All right. Amen.
Good night.